So now you have a basic overview of how HTML works. Now let's see it in practice when we're using Flask as well. Right now, our Flask server is just returning this lame string, hello world, and it shows up as is on the browser. Showing up like basic strings and objects and stuff, that can be great when we have an API that's returning data. But right now we have a web server that we want to return a more complicated web page for, where you can see stuff that's kind of with more content and structure and things like that. So HTML comes in handy here. How can we use that in Flask? One thing we could do is just directly put in HTML tags within the string that we're returning, and the browser will parse that string accordingly. So basic thing I can start with is to bold my hello world. I'm going to add this B tag here, opening, and then the B tag here, and it's wrapped around my hello world string. So super simple. I saved, and it restarted the terminal because I have debug equals true set here. And now let's see when I preview, then it should be bolded. Cool. So that's great. You can see how we can slowly build on this and add more complexity to the web page that we're building. What's another thing we can do? Maybe we can add a picture. So we can use the image element, and that usually takes in this attribute called source. There's two ways of doing an image. You could either have a static file, a resource that you have saved already in your folder with your code, or you could be referencing a dynamic URL and it can pull from there. I'm going to go with that way just because it's easier and I don't have a picture saved right now. So let's quickly look up a file. I'll do appa because we've been talking about avatar. And let's do this one. He's looking kind of funny here. I can right click, I can copy the image address, and then I can actually set that as the value for the source attribute. So in quotes, I'm going to add this image address. And then finally, I'm just going to have this closing thing right here with the slash. So an image is actually, it's an empty element. There's no kind of child or there's nothing that gets wrapped inside of it. So you don't have like a slash image at the end. You just have a slash and a greater than sign. So I saved it. I'm going to preview. What should we expect? Now it's a little more complex. We should have our text as well as our APA. And here we go. When I preview, I see the big guy here, and we have a cooler web page going. But you can probably see how this is getting a little more complicated. This string can get really long and just annoying to use and parse and look through. So that's where templates actually come in. Flask has this really useful tool or engine called Jinja, where they provide a way to more easily build HTML files and return them to the client. So the way to do that is you can also import this function, render template. And then what you can do here is, I'm going to keep that here actually for later. I'll just comment it out. What you can do is return render template and then the name of your file. So let's just call it very basic index.html. Now we're not ready just yet. I'm going to close out of my server. I'm going to clear. When Flask sees index.html, what it's going to do is look through your current directory, so wherever your app.py lives, and it's going to see if you have a folder called templates. So let's first make that folder, make directory mkdir templates. Let's cd into templates, and then let's create our index.html file in here. So it should have the same name exactly as what you're writing here in the code. Now I'm going to open that up with C9. And it's taking a second. Let's see. Looks like it didn't open up for some reason. I'm just going to open up manually. It's fine. All right. So Final thing I want to do is just copy paste this same HTML, that long string I was writing out, and put that into here. So now you have your HTML file. Now let's run the server. Ideally, what we should see is that we're going to see the exact same thing that we were seeing earlier. It says can't open file app.py, no such file. That's because I'm in the templates folder right now. So let's go one up using cd dot dot. Now I'm in lecture 4, and let's run python app.py. So we're running, and I'm going to try previewing it. And here we go. I'm looking at the same page that I was looking at, meaning that I was able to successfully translate my HTML to this file and use a template for it. Awesome. Okay, so now let's build on this a little bit further. One thing that we were talking about earlier was the anatomy of an HTML document. Right now, everything worked because the browser can often be very forgiving and fill in the tags for you. But let's write good code and let's do it the way that you're supposed to. So let's fill out that basic anatomy that you usually see. You have your doc type. You should have your root HTML element. You should have your head. And then you should have your body. So cool, I put that there. And everything should, of course, look the same. Nothing's changing here. But now we're using the proper structure and anatomy. Next thing I want to do is just add a few more elements just for fun, because why not? Now we have our whole file for doing this. So I'm going to put H1, which means like a large heading, and H2, so it's a slightly smaller heading. And then I'll put H3, even smaller, and cool. And you can see actually Cloud9 is auto formatting and indenting and things like that on your HTML file, which is nice and useful. Let's see what this looks like. All right, so for some, oh, okay, here it is. Now you can see your hello world slowly echoing and getting smaller, and then our image as before. I want to show you a good tool for debugging. You might already know about it, you might not. I just opened it up into a separate tab, and you can do Control Shift I or Command Option I, depending on if you're Mac or Windows. You can also just click these 3 dots, go to More Tools, and then Developer Tools. So I'm on Chrome right now, Chrome Developer Tools, and it's super useful through my work whenever I need to debug something on the UI, especially when we're dealing with HTML and CSS things. So I'm in the console right now, but you can go to Elements, and here you can actually see the HTML for the page that you're on. And if you hover over certain parts, then it's going to actually highlight where that is on the web page that you're looking at. So I'm on H2, and you know exactly where H2 is. So this can be really useful. And we're going to get into this later, but it also is showing like the styles that are included here in the CSS, and it's interactive, so you can change things around and see what happens when you change. So instead of hello world, I could even change this text right here to hello Nelman, and it's gonna reflect that automatically right there. So this is a really good debugging tool. You can see everything that's showing up. Maybe there's an element that's not showing up, or maybe that element is not showing the right style in CSS. And you can find all of that here with the developer tools. Okay, so next thing I want to talk about is there's this concept of like a static versus a dynamic page. Right now, everything that we've been doing is static. So all of the information that we're providing on this website here is hard-coded in some way. I've hard-coded this URL. I've hard-coded this text that I'm showing. So nothing is being dynamically processed. Your server is not really doing any work to show this data. So if I refresh it like 100 times, I'm always going to see the exact same thing. But we can make things dynamic in a few different ways, and templates can be really useful here as well. So let's start with a very simple thing. Let's just show a random number on the page every time that the user visits it. So this is very bare bones. It's not very useful, but it is technically dynamic because whenever you refresh, you're not going to be getting the same sort of output because the server is doing something before you get to the client. So let's use the random library and just generate a random number and random.randint from 1 to 20. How can I actually show that on the UI side? So how can I pass that down? If I was not working with HTML, then maybe I could have just done return random number and it would have passed that down. So in that string or whatever, you could have done it. But I want to do it within HTML for now. And the way to do that is you can actually pass in arguments to render template based on Python variables. So I have my file name here, but let's pass in the next argument, and that's going to say num equals random number. And this is basically setting an HTML variable to a Python variable. So I'm saying in HTML, you're going to see something called num that you can refer to wherever you want. And that's going to be associated with this Python variable that I dynamically got some data from. So I'm going to save that on this side. And then to actually use it in your HTML file, you're going to use some curly brackets. So instead of hello world, let's put the number front and center. So I'm going to have open and close curly brackets. And then you're going to be referring to the left side of the variable that you set. So let's put num there. You can space it out just to make it a little easier to look at. And what should I expect now? Ideally, this right here, this hello world, should change. And it should now be some random number between 1 and 20. And if I keep refreshing, then hopefully we're going to see that the number is changing. So I'm going to preview. I see 10. That's great. But let's make sure it's dynamic. So I press preview again, preview running application, 4, 6, the numbers are changing. And now I can confirm that the server is doing some processing to change this web page before it reaches the client. Cool. Now, if you want to show multiple kind of data variables from the Python server in the client, then you can do that as well. So let's make a list of, let's say, 5 different things. What should I put? TV shows. And I'm going to put Mandalorian. I'm going to put Queen's Gambit. Let's get rid of that apostrophe. I'll put Avatar, put Korra, and I'll put, what else? The Office. Okay, so 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. And I'm going to choose a random integer between 1 and 5 now. So what I can do here, which can be useful, is now I can randomly choose from this list by accessing it from a random index, which is defined right here by this variable. So next thing I'm going to do is my show, which is going to be my HTML variable, is going to be equal to TV shows and then random number here, which is my index. And let's see, I'm getting a invalid syntax error. That's because I have multiple arguments here. You need to remember that those commas. Okay. So I'm randomly getting this number, and then I'm choosing amongst some hard-coded list to get one of those options. Quit out of my terminal, so let me just rerun it one more time. And then we haven't actually shown it on our index.html file. So let's do that next. So I'm going to replace the second hello world with my favorite show is, and then you're going to have your curly brackets to reference a dynamic variable. We called it my show, so make sure it's the exact same wording. And then cool. So the first row should show us which index we were choosing, and then the second row should show the actual show. All right, so from here we can see when we ran this that the index was 1, and then that led to my favorite show is Queen's Gambit, which is index 1 here. And I know the numbers versus index might have been a little imperfect here, but you get the point. And that's it. This is kind of a very basic way of how you can make, one, a dynamic site, and two, integrate HTML to have some more complicated content.